Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we'll have the latest from the live radar. Run for the latest weather warnings, as we have got numerous rain warnings issued over the next couple of days, as we are continuing to see some really heavy rain as low pressure continues to swell around to our southwest. Eventually though, the cold air will be arriving later on the week and it should turn it drier, especially further northwards and eventually a little bit more further southwards as well. We'll be able to look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, and we can start to see the cold Arctic air arriving for parts of northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of this week. But it might take a little bit longer to reach parts of southern England. By the end of the UKV's run into the start of next weekend, we are seeing a real big temperature contrast, around 15-degree temperature contrast from southeast England up towards northern Scotland come Saturday afternoon. So yes, cold air is arriving, just going to be a bit more delayed further southwards as expected. We have to look at that in more detail on the longer range charts, and we continue to see strong agreement for cold and maybe very cold conditions to arrive for the second half of the month in northern areas and perhaps more the final third of the month for southern areas. At the moment, the GFS is the most bullish run alongside its ensembles, and that's not a surprise knowing the GFS and how it normally reacts with these colder patterns. The GM is kind of in the middle. It's still really cold, but it perhaps isn't as quite optimistic as the GFS. There's more sort of areas of uncertainty there. And the ECMWF is definitely the more pessimistic run today, or you could argue more realistic run with all options still on the table. Still got the very cold patterns within its ensemble outlook, but it's by no means kind of 95% short like the GFS ensembles appear to be this evening. So still got a whole range of possibilities, but we continue to see chopping and changing. We have a little bit more in the way of details this evening. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. And I'll go on this a little bit later on in the evening, around 9 PM, and you can see we've got some heavy rain just off the coast of northeast England. This did spread through further southwards, heading through central southern England, through the Midlands, up towards northern England throughout today, and has dumped a lot of rain, really torrential some of the rain within that. And that is just a recipe for what we're going to see over the next couple of days. You can already see the next weather front out in the Atlantic. So pretty dry right now, a few odd showers around, but we're just kind of in between two weather systems. Heavy rain is going to be arriving fairly imminently. You can see, as we have a look at the temperatures, it's still very mild. It doesn't look mild, there's plenty of blues here, but for early to mid-November, overnight temperatures, as I said, it's 9 PM now, we're expecting those temperatures to drop away. It is very mild, temperatures still in the double digits, but it's not going to be hanging around for too long. As we head towards the end of the week, it is going to be turning below average in most areas and potentially pretty cold further northwards before the sort of main potential very cold air arrives into early next week or by the end of the weekend. Now, of course, yes, it's going to be below average. Temperatures by day, maybe 7 or 8 degrees at best, maybe colder as we head into next week, and overnight closer to freezing. And those are cold temperatures, but I think the biggest thing is going to feel like, just because we're going from 16, 17, 18 degree days and 10 degree overnights to 10 degree shift downwards. So it's not only the fact that we are going to be a good few degrees below average, it's the fact that we're going from a good few degrees above average to a good few degrees below average. It's going to make all the difference to that feel like temperature. Now, if you look at the latest weather warnings, as I said, we have numerous warnings for rain. We've got one across southwest England from midday tomorrow until midnight. So that is for Tuesday for heavy rain with strong southerly winds. Again, classic rain, yellow rain warning here, 20 to 40 quite widely, 50 to 70 millimetres in some of the wettest spots. Southern parts of Wales, similar time frame, starting a little bit earlier though, around 7 AM, but still till midnight. 30 to 50 mils quite widely, up towards 60 to 80. Northern Ireland, or large portions of Northern Ireland, from 6 AM until 9 PM tomorrow. 20 to 30 quite widely, up towards 40, and maybe some heavier bursts in that, giving heavier rain for a short period of time. And then for southern and southwestern Scotland, again from 10 AM until midnight. Again, we're looking at 20 to 40 quite widely, up towards 60. So kind of a classic yellow rain warning, disruptive amount in places, but we're not expecting, hundreds of millimetres that would cause widespread flooding. This is more surface water flooding and the risk of some more widespread river flooding if we continue to see this over the next couple of days. It is going to continue, but hopefully once that cold air arrives, it should dry things down, as generally Arctic air has lower dew points. Lower dew points is drier air, essentially meaning precipitation is not normally as widespread. And that's why a lot of the time when we do see colder spells, we do actually struggle to see precipitation, especially inland, because of how dry the air is. So hopefully we have got a lot of rain-affected warnings here, potential flooding, but it should subside by the end of the week, especially for those northern areas. We can see that on the latest UKV, that rain spreading through earlier on this afternoon and evening, clearing away to the northeast, but then the next band of rain arrives for Tuesday morning, focus more further northwards and westwards, as we saw with those weather warnings, and it looks really quite heavy as this moves in. It will shift slowly eastwards during Tuesday evening into the early hours of Wednesday and could persist during early hours of Wednesday there for quite a long period of time across the southeast. Eventually that low will shift northwards, and this is where we start to see the dividing line, where that slightly drier air with a few odd showers but some bluer skies further northwards, that's the cold air. The weather front is the dividing line between the very cold air, and already a bit of snow over the highlands of Scotland. Not too unusual, but a little bit of snow there. As we progress during Thursday into Friday, the weather front stalls and actually it starts to shift southwards and disintegrate away, and the next weather system doesn't get much further northwards in southern England. And this is that block starting to take over and starting to push northerly winds in. You see that weather front makes no progress. So yes, northern areas, as I said, much drier, brighter, colder, and potentially a few wintry showers. Further southwards though, the lows stall, the weather front stall, and we could see an awful lot of rain dumped here during Friday and into Saturday as well. Looks like it could rain pretty much all day Friday and all day Saturday. So we could see further weather warnings here. We are looking though, northern England southwards. So yes, some of the same areas that are going to see some very heavy rain over the next 24 hours, those spots could have some flooding issues. But further northwards, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, hopefully the heaviest the rain is actually gone by the end of Wednesday into Thursday. And you can see eventually into Saturday that weather front starts to peter away, and then again we're kind of left with that dividing line. We can see that really developing during Wednesday with the upper air temperatures here. Again, very cold air starting to arrive, coming up against the mild air. You can see the big temperature contrast, close to kind of 15-degree temperature contrast there. And you continue to see the cold air tries to push in. It struggles, gets pushed back a little bit during the weekend. But as we'll see in a few moments' time, it does eventually push back in from the majority of the runs in the subsequent days, especially as we head towards the final third of the month, around that day 7, day 8 to day 10 time frame. Now, if you look at the max temperatures, you can see overnight tonight, not too cold, just about high single digits. Into Tuesday afternoon, temperatures, look at that, 14 degrees for parts of England and Wales, very mild for the time of year. Into Wednesday, it's a similar story, where again, 15 degrees, very, very mild. And into Thursday, look across Scotland, temperatures not getting much above the low single digits in some spots, 15 degrees for parts of England and Wales. And this is that big dividing line that's just setting up across the Scottish borders up towards northern England there and parts of Northern Ireland. And you see the colder air shifts further southwards, widespread frost to Scotland there into Friday morning. And then by Friday afternoon, 15 degrees across the south coast, 7 degrees across the Midlands, close to freezing across Scotland. So a big battleground taking place. And then into Saturday, similar, close to freezing across parts of Scotland, 7 or 8 degrees across the Midlands, 15 degrees across the far southeast. So yeah, a real big temperature contrast coming up, especially Friday and Saturday, most likely Sunday as well. We could actually see milder air winning out a little bit more into Monday before eventually, as we'll see from the latest GFS, cold air looks likely to flood back in as we head into the early portion of next week in around 7 or 8 days' time. So if you do look at the latest GFS, you see the block is starting to develop towards Greenland, and we do see a brief northerly wind develop by the end of this week. And you can see that cold air does move in for a time, but the low holds it off for a little bit, and the high kind of spirals around, doesn't do much. But as I said, into the next week, in around day 6, day 7, day 8, we unlock the door to an even stronger northerly wind. And look at this, the cold air wins out completely. And cold air comes flooding in for next working week, and it stays very cold and potentially quite widely wintry for the whole of next week, all the way through to kind of the 25th, 26th, before eventually the high does topple. But again, I wouldn't look at that really long range stuff with too much detail, simply because it is a good 2 weeks away. What we're looking at here is from around day 6, day 7, very cold air floods in, and it goes nowhere for about a week. And I'm not just talking northern England there. You can see we're slightly milder further southwards, Saturday, Sunday, maybe even Monday. Cold air floods in into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and just stays there all the way to the end of the week. Now, as I said, it doesn't mean it's going to be bitterly cold the whole time. It doesn't mean we're going to see widespread snow, and it doesn't mean we're going to see freezing cold conditions. But what we are going to see is, look at that, temperatures maybe 3 or 4 degrees by day, maybe even close to freezing if we see precipitation by day, and by night, temperatures widely below freezing. So again, not the kind of freezer-like conditions, and that's because it is mid-November and the air mass isn't that cold because of the time of year, but it is still going to be a very cold spell, very cold late or mid to late November spell as we do head through on this latest GFS. As I said, though, the GFS is the optimistic pattern. It's got a lot of support from its ensembles, but of course the ensembles are likely to have the same bias as the operational run. The GM is a little bit more in the middle. It still goes cold, but perhaps not as sustained and for not as long of a period of time. So initially we do see that bit of a northerly later on this week. Milder air winds out for a short period of time during next weekend. You can see the milder air gets close to Scotland but doesn't fully push in, and then we see another push of very cold air into early next week. It looks really cold there, and then lows very quickly by Wednesday, Thursday start to slide in. Now this probably takes away the cold for parts of southern England. It's more 2 or 3 days of cold, a brief colder shot. But for Scotland and northern England, the cold hangs on, and actually we could see a lot of significant snow in this sort of pattern. If we do actually zoom in and look at the precipitation, we're likely to see some really heavy snow along this boundary. If we do look at the snow depth, you can see some significant snow as that does develop. Now, of course, mid-November, unlikely to hang around for too long and unlikely to produce too much as we are, of course, still in autumn. But for the 18th, 19th of November, that really would be a pretty historic early snowfall, a significant snowfall if this did occur this early on in the season. So yes, it's not as cold and blocked as the GFS, it's not as widespread, but it is potentially colder for the north and snowier for the north, and actually by day 10 it does wrap cold air back in. So a lot of uncertainty, GM a little bit more in the middle, but potentially even snowier than the GFS, even though it's perhaps not as cold and blocked and as locked in as the GFS is. Now the ECMWF is a little bit more pessimistic than the GM. It doesn't really get much cold air in for southern England. You can see northerly winds start to arrive into next week, but you can see it's not a direct northerly. The high topples a little bit, and yes, some chilly air gets in, but nothing very cold, nothing that would open the doors to any actual wintry conditions. Yes, frosts, yes, average to below average temperatures, but nothing too remarkable. Similar to the GM, cold air does get in for Scotland, and so it could be a very cold and wintry period for Scotland, but elsewhere you can see milder air actually fully winds out towards the end of the run. So ECMWF, much less spectacular today. You could argue it's pessimistic, you could argue it's more realistic, and it's just going perhaps with a more realistic outcome given our luck in the UK with getting these cold northeasterly winds. So whatever way we see it is another very interesting one that we have to take account for. And if we look at the ensembles now, we have to see how much support each of those runs has. So you can see the GFS has actually got a lot of support. Now this is London, and you can see the next 5 or 6 days, we're well above average, no sign of anything cold. And then in about 6.5 days time, we flip from well above average to well below average. And in exactly about a week's time, majority of runs are down towards that -5 level. Not going much colder than that. So as I said, we're not likely to see anything ridiculously cold. But it's about 5, 6, 7 degrees below average, and we stay there for much of next week, or for the rest of next week, for slowly climbing close to average. You see the operational run hangs well below average for a little bit longer. It takes another 2 or 3 days to get back towards that mean, and that's why I said be a bit more sceptical of the end of that GFS run. You can see though, regardless, GFS definitely on board with quite a prolonged, good 4, 5, 6 day colder spell. Nothing, completely ridiculous, nothing that's, 10 plus degrees below average. That's the kind of levels we would be talking about, really quite ridiculous cold, especially for the time of year. But 5, 6, 7 degrees below average, notable. With higher precipitation, you can't rule out a bit of wintriness. Not going to probably see any significant snow, any settling snow at all. What we could see is wintry showers, some falling snow, frosts, things like that. And as I said, for mid-November, that is pretty unprecedented, especially for recent years. We've seen some snow in November for some areas, especially Midlands, Northern England, but normally it's in the last few days or last week or so of November. This is a week or two earlier than that, so it is, pretty notable. See the dew points dropping close to freezing, if not below freezing, and that's another kind of check mark for potential wintriness. You can see the 2 metre temperatures dropping much colder as well, 5 or 6 degree highs, and those are kind of optimistic highs, and closer to freezing overnight. So going from 14, 15 degree highs maybe to 5 or 6 come next week, and again, very cold for the time of year. And new snow depth, there are a few snow depth spikes, but again, I wouldn't take them too literally. They are more just to imply which ensemble members have precipitation that could fall as snow. Once we get to kind of the 2 or 3 day time frame, then maybe we'll look at them in a little bit more detail. But it just shows there is scope there. Glasgow, though, see a lot more snow spikes. Again, nothing overwhelming because of the time of year, but you can see a much more prolonged colder spell there for Scotland. You can see it's not actually as below average as as it is for London. It's only 4, 5 degrees, 3, 4, 5 degrees below average here, but that's because further northwards these colder conditions are more in line with expectations. But you can see, a lot of precipitation. You can see it does die down a lot over the weekend, and again, we saw that from the UKB. But looking very cold, potentially a lot of wintriness. And you can see the 2 metre temperatures are much, much colder. 2 or 3 degree highs for a prolonged period of time, and overnight temperatures below freezing. But if we compare to the ECMWF, you can see it's not, eradicated the colder solutions. There are quite a few there, but we've got a lot more milder solutions as well. You can see there's quite a few more that are above average and quite a few more that are just hovering around average or that are a couple of degrees below average, like the ECMWF. So the ECMWF wasn't a mild run, it just wasn't a very cold run. It was more of a chilly run, 2 or 3 degrees below average, not 5 or 6 degrees below average like the GFS was showing. And you can see it does moderate close to average again. What it just tells me is the ECMWF is easing on the side of caution. A lot more spread here with the ensembles, just simply a lot more uncertainty. GFS probably just picked up on the idea of the very cold pattern, and all ensembles are kind of falling in line, whereas the ECMWF is a little bit more spread. So probably is a little bit more realistic for our chances. I'd still probably be on the side of the colder pattern, just from what we've seen over the past week or two and the longer range signals. But then the skeptic in me, knowing how these patterns have developed over the past 5 years or so, a lot of the time they do or often, show a lot at day 7 to day 10. And then we get to day 2 or 3, heavily moderated, or more of a northern event. So, the bit of me that's looking purely at the data over the last couple of weeks, I would say, potentially very cold conditions quite widely, that 5, 6, 7 degrees below average. But then the more historical side of me, looking at what's happened over the past few years, would probably say the ECMWF solution is a little bit more realistic. Below average, but more like 2 or 3 degrees below average. Temperatures by day, high single digits, overnight, low single digits, maybe touching freezing. You can see for northern areas though, a little bit more locked in on that colder pattern. Still a little bit more sceptical with some milder runs, a lot more milder runs the GFS was showing, but there are quite a few more colder runs there as well for Scotland. So we've still got pretty good confidence that a colder spell is coming, definitely in the northern areas by the end of this week, and then a few days later into early next week it could push further southwards, but still got a lot of uncertainty exactly how far it will push southwards, how cold that air mass will be, i.e. how direct is that north or northeasterly. The GFS was really direct, ECMWF and GEM a little bit more distorted. And of course, what low pressure systems could develop out in the Atlantic and how they interact with the Greenland block. As we saw from the GM, that could develop some significant snow in places if the right battleground scenario does set up. So a lot to decipher over the coming days, but we are getting to that point now when we are going to start to look at some precipitation charts and some details over the next few days. So make sure you stay tuned as we'll have more updates out throughout the rest of this week. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.